The fate of the Philippine vice president in the hands of the Senate as it convenes for her impeachment trial, days after chaos and gunfire in its halls. Sara Duterte last week formally accused by the majority of the House of Representatives of graft charges and being involved in an alleged plot to assassinate President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. She may face a ban from holding public office if she is convicted, and that would derail her 2028 presidential ambitions. Mr. Duterte has denied any wrongdoing, calling the impeachment effort politically motivated.
The court having been organized and the articles of impeachment having been presented, let a writ of summons be issued to the Vice President, Sara Zimmerman Duterte, who is directed to file her answer within a non-extendable period of 10 days from receipt.
Dozens of protesters gathered outside the heavily guarded Senate building, some voicing support, others calling for her conviction. Ronald De La Rosa was the only senator not present for today's proceedings. Former President Rodrigo Duterte's chief drug war enforcer fled the Senate building last week after a surprise return to vote for a change of presidency in the Senate before Ms. Duterte's impeachment trial. He holed himself up in the building to evade detention and possible transfer to the International Criminal Court in The Hague. That triggered a dramatic standoff during which gunshots were heard in the building. De La Rosa escaped out of the Senate hours later, and his whereabouts are at this point unknown. And more, let's bring in Edmund Tayao. He is political analyst. He joins us from Manila. Mr. Tayao, this scuffle, this gunfire, this chaos before the change, and now trial, that proceedings are starting for Ms. Duterte. How would you connect what's happened in the Senate with chances of impeachment for Sara Duterte?
Well, what happened last week, the sudden change of leadership in the Senate, can only be explained by those allied with the Vice President preparing to convene the Senate as an impeachment tribunal. The newly elected Senate President Alan Cayetano denies this, but fugitive Senator Bato de la Rosa admitted in a news feature interview that it was no less Senator Alan Cayetano who called him up and asked him to make sure that he appears in the Senate so that they will have a majority of one senator to be able to wrest control of the Senate. And was this the gunfire that you mentioned earlier on? Well, it would appear now, with the recent revelations and investigations coming out, that it was all staged to allow Senator Bato de la Rosa to leave the premises of the Senate again, and therefore excuse himself from the risk of getting arrested and brought to The Hague for his inclusion in the charges against the former President Duterte.
Okay, Mr. Tayao, if I could clarify this. So Ronald De La Rosa would have made up 24 members of the Senate. So today we are, in fact, only seeing 23, and we will need 16 votes. That's the majority to convict Sara Duterte of her impeachment charges. Do you think whatever machinations involved, whether it's getting De La Rosa in to vote the Senate President Alan Peter Cayetano in, Cayetano now as Senate President, does that make the difference for that 16 votes being scored to take out Sara Duterte?
As it is right now, honestly, I don't think the Senate can muster 16 votes to convict the Vice President. But the good thing with the recent decision of the Supreme Court requiring the lower house, the House of Representatives, to weigh in on the evidences presented and attached to the articles of impeachment, it has already revealed to the public the extent of the allegations against the vice president. In other words, even if the number of allies of the Dutertes, particularly that of the vice president, are enough no, to acquit the vice president, that will impact on their political career, considering that the public already knows the evidences presented, no, as far as the allegations of fraud and misdemeanor, no, as far as the vice president is concerned. And so experts and analysts are not much concerned anymore whether or not the Senate will convict as a matter of consideration of the very heavy evidence that's attached to the articles of impeachment. I have to mention that there are more than 1,000 pages attached to the 53 pages articles of impeachment submitted to the Senate. And so if the Senate ignores that, that is as if was this risking their political career to the public, considering the 2028 elections is just around the corner.
But arguably, the Senate president, that's Alan Peter Cayetano, who is known as a Duterte ally, he does have control over proceedings, the length of proceedings, and how much, as you suggest, this evidence will be examined by the Senate. He could limit the amount of time, attention paid to that evidence.
That is true. That's why I'm emphasizing that if the was this original procedure was followed in the earlier attempt to impeach the vice president was followed, there would not have been any occasion at all, no, for the public to have any inclination or have any idea of the evidences that will be presented to support the allegations to the vice president. But now that this has been painstakingly weighed in on by the House of Representatives before the transmittal of the articles of impeachment to the Senate, that becomes now was this a challenge to the Senate, how they will be able to change now the change the sense of the public as far as these evidences are concerned. Because to my mind, if the Senate is not able to convince the public that there's not enough support no, to the allegations against the vice president, then that will impact significantly on their political career. In other words, it will make the more obvious that they are there only to protect the Duterte name, no, and therefore allow the vice president to run in 2028. So this is very much more a political exercise, a political significance more than a legal significance.
All right, so they're weighing their political allegiances with the longevity of their political careers. Thanks so much, Edmund Tayao, political analyst, joining us there from Manila.